There is a specific kind of silence that happens when someone says something that should hurt, and instead of pain, you just feel something click into place. Like a door locking from the inside. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. That silence happened for me on a Tuesday night, over a half-eaten dinner, when the woman I thought I was building a future with told me she wasn't done having fun yet. She didn't say it cruelly. She wasn't trying to wound me. She said it the way someone mentions tomorrow's weather, matter of fact, casual, like I was supposed to nod and say, "No worries, I'll wait." And here is what nobody tells you about those moments. The most powerful thing you can do is not beg, not argue, not cry. The most powerful thing I ever did in that relationship was look across that table and say two words, "All right," and mean them completely differently than she assumed. My name is Marcus. I am 33 years old, and until about 14 months ago, I was in what I genuinely believed was the relationship of my life. Her name was Jade. 29, sharp, funny, the kind of person who made every room feel a little more alive just by walking into it. We met at a mutual friend's birthday thing, one of those crowded apartment parties where everyone's talking too loud and the music is always 2 volumes wrong. She was standing near the window rolling her eyes at someone trying to make a speech, and I laughed, and she caught me laughing, and that was kind of it. We dated for 2 months before making things official. Within the first year, I knew I was serious about her. Not in a rushing way, not in a pressure way. Just in the quiet, settled, this makes sense kind of way that you hope relationships eventually feel like. We moved in together after 2.5 years. Talked about the future the way couples do when they're actually thinking about it, not just using it as a thing to say. Which neighborhoods we liked. Whether we wanted a house or to keep renting. Kids, eventually, in the abstract but real way. She had opinions. I had opinions. We talked about them like they mattered. By year 4, I started thinking about engagement in a concrete way. I didn't propose yet. I wanted to have a direct conversation first, because I'd watched enough people get blindsided by misaligned expectations that I wasn't willing to skip that step. So one evening, about 5 years in, I brought it up. Not as an ultimatum, not as a demand, just as a real conversation between two adults who had been building something together and deserved to know if they were actually building toward the same thing. That was when she said it. She said she didn't want to get married yet, said she hadn't had her fun yet, that she wanted to travel without checking in, go out without feeling tied down, meet people, experience things, not feel limited. Tied down, like I was a rope around her ankle, not a person who had chosen her every single day for 5 years. I remember sitting very still. I remember the sound of the fan in the kitchen. I remember the way she was watching me, almost braced, like she expected an argument. And I remember deciding, in that strange clarity that comes sometimes when things get quiet enough, that I wasn't going to fight for a version of our relationship she didn't actually want. I said, "All right." She blinked, said, "Really, that's it?" I said, "Yes, that's it." She looked almost disappointed, like she'd geared up for a negotiation and I just walked out of the room. She reached for my hand, said she was glad I understood. What she didn't understand was what all right actually meant. It didn't mean I accept your terms. It didn't mean I'll wait as long as you need. It meant I hear you, I believe you, and I'm going to act accordingly. That night after she went out to meet friends, I sat alone and did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I made plans, real plans, just for me. The thing about being someone's safety net is that you don't always notice you've become one. It happens gradually. You're reliable, so they lean on that reliability. You're consistent, so your consistency becomes a given. And slowly, without anyone meaning for it to happen, you go from being a partner to being a placeholder. The person who will still be there when they're done doing whatever they need to do first. I had been in that waiting room for longer than that one conversation. I see that now. But that conversation was the first time the door was opened wide enough for me to see exactly where I was sitting. So I got up. Not dramatically, not to make a point. I just stopped organizing my life around someone who had made it clear she wasn't organizing hers around mine. I stopped checking in when she went out, stopped rearranging my evenings around her last-minute plans, stopped floating expenses with the quiet assumption that it was all part of building something together, because she had just told me we weren't building together. Not right now, maybe later, maybe never. She noticed within about a week. "You seem different," she said. "I'm just adjusting," I told her. "To what?" "To what you said." She didn't love that answer, but she also didn't have a counter for it because what was she going to say? "You shouldn't believe me when I tell you what I want." I booked a solo weekend trip, visited an old friend 3 states away. When she asked who I was going with, I said just me. She looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. "You're doing your own thing now." I looked at her calmly. "You said you didn't want to feel limited." She called me dramatic, said I was making it weird, said I was taking it personally. Of course I was taking it personally. She'd made it personal. I just wasn't making it a scene. What she was experiencing wasn't me punishing her. It was her first real look at what life actually looked like when I stopped being her perpetual backup plan. Here is something I've come to understand about the situation I was in. Jade didn't want to leave me. She didn't want to break up. She wasn't trying to hurt me or dismiss what we'd built. What she wanted was freedom with a guarantee. She wanted the option to go out, stay out late, meet people, travel spontaneously, feel young and untethered. And she wanted to come home to someone reliable, stable, waiting. The apartment clean, the rent covered, the future available on standby whenever she decided she was ready to claim it. That's not a relationship. That's a subscription you don't bother canceling because it's still useful. And the moment I stopped being available on standby, she started to feel the weight of what she'd said. About a month after that dinner conversation, she asked me something I wasn't expecting. She was folding laundry on the couch, keeping her eyes on what she was doing, and she asked if I still saw us getting married someday. I thought about lying. I thought about giving her the comfortable answer. Instead, I told her the truth. I said I still saw myself getting married. I just wasn't waiting anymore. She put down what she was folding and looked at me. Her face went through about 3 different expressions in 2 seconds. "So you're punishing me," she said. "I'm not," I said. "I'm listening to what you told me." She didn't know what to do with that. Because here's the thing about someone who expects you to wait. They're used to being able to calibrate around your patience. The whole dynamic depends on you staying in a predictable orbit around them. I had drifted out of orbit, and she could feel the gravity failing. While Jade was leaning harder into her freedom era, posting pictures at midnight and narrating her nights out like a highlight reel, I was doing something quieter. I accepted a promotion that came with more travel and better long-term trajectory. I'd turned down opportunities like that before, in the unspoken logic of someone building a shared life with another person. But that logic didn't apply anymore. I started putting money aside in a separate account, not out of spite, just because I had goals that weren't attached to us anymore. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift during the absorbed years of the relationship. Guys I used to see every few weeks who I'd reduced to occasional texts. I started showing up again, and I started taking better care of myself. Not to attract anyone, just because when you stop spending mental energy on a relationship that isn't going anywhere, you suddenly have a surprising amount of bandwidth for other things. Jade noticed every single change, and strangely none of them made her happy. She accused me of checking out, of being passive-aggressive, of making her feel guilty for being honest with me. I told her as clearly and as without cruelty as I could manage that I wasn't trying to make her feel anything. I was just living my life. She said, "You've gotten boring." I thought about that for a second. Then I said, "You used to say you wanted peace." She didn't respond. But what I kept thinking about in the days that followed was this. The version of me she had been attracted to was not actually the boring one. The boring version was the one who had slowly shrunk himself to fit inside her uncertainty. The one who never asked too much, never pushed too hard, never said this is what I want so either you want it too, or we need to figure out what that means. That version had been quietly disappearing for years. He'd just been too polite about it to notice. I need to tell you about the night the conversation finally stopped being managed and became real. I had come home to pack a bag. I was staying at a friend's place that weekend. Not because we had fought, because I needed space that wasn't loaded with the weight of everything unspoken, and because, if I was being honest with myself, I was no longer sure I was coming back the same way I left. Jade was home when I got there. She watched me pull the bag from the closet. Her arms folded slowly, the way they did when she was working herself up to something. "You going somewhere? Staying with a friend this weekend? Since when do you need to do that?" I zipped a pair of shoes into the front pocket. Since I stopped pretending this is all fine, she exploded a little, said I was punishing her, said I was acting like she'd committed a crime, said she'd been honest with me and now I was making her feel terrible for it. And I told her the truest thing I think I've ever said to her. I said, "You were honest. I believed you. This is just what it looks like when I believe you." She stared at me. Then quieter she asked, "If I change my mind in a year, you're just gone." I paused at the door. I said I might be married by then. Her face went pale. She said, "You're bluffing." I said, "I'm not." And the terrifying, clarifying thing was that I meant it. Not as a threat, not as leverage, as a statement of fact about who I was now and what I was moving toward with or without her. I left. She didn't call that night, but I know she didn't sleep. Here is what nobody talks about when they talk about walking away from something real. They talk about the pain, the grief, the loneliness, the missing someone. All of that is true. I felt all of it. But they don't talk about the relief. The specific, bone-deep relief of no longer pretending. Of no longer shrinking the future into something small enough to fit inside someone else's maybe. Of waking up and asking yourself what you actually want today for your actual life and being allowed to answer honestly. I started to breathe differently. I don't know how else to describe it. A few weeks after that night, Jade and I had one more real conversation. She had stopped going out as much. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She sat across from me in our apartment, in the space we still shared but had stopped really inhabiting together, and she said something I didn't expect. She said, "I didn't want to lose you. I just didn't want to feel like I was choosing everything at once." I told her I understood that. I also told her something she needed to hear. You weren't being asked to choose everything at once. You were being asked whether we were moving in the same direction. You answered. I listened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked if I thought people could grow at different speeds. I said yes. I also said that growing at different speeds was fine. The problem was when one person's growth required the other person to stand still and wait. She didn't fight that. I moved my things out over the following 2 weeks. No big fight. No dramatic finale. Just boxes and quiet and the specific ache of ending something that had once felt permanent. I want to be clear about something. This story does not end with me immediately finding someone perfect and riding off into some triumphant romantic sunset. That is not what happened, and I think those stories do a disservice to people in real situations. What happened was quieter than that. I spent a few months genuinely on my own. Not heartbroken and scrolling, but actually getting comfortable with my own company again. I went on some dates. Some were good, some were awkward, some were genuinely fun with no further attachment. I gave myself permission to not be in a rush. Then I met someone through a work connection. Her name is Elena. We talked for almost 3 hours the first time we had coffee. She asked me what I was building toward in my life, and I answered without hesitation. And then she answered without hesitation. And there was something in that symmetry that felt like something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Like direction, like alignment, like two people moving in the same way at the same time. I'm not going to over-romanticize what we have. We've been together 7 months. We don't know yet how all the bigger questions will shake out. But here is what I know. She has never once made me feel like my desire for a real future was a burden. I have never once felt like I was asking too much by simply knowing what I want. And that alone, that one simple thing, has changed my entire relationship to what love feels like. Jade reached out about 2 months after I'd moved out. It was late, and it was long. She wrote that she hadn't realized how empty the freedom would feel when I was no longer part of the picture. She wrote that she thought she was choosing herself, but had ended up just choosing to be alone in a different way. She wrote that she missed me, and that she'd spent a lot of time lately thinking about what she actually wanted, and that the answer kept coming back to things she hadn't valued enough when they were right in front of her. It was genuine. I don't doubt that. It was probably the most honest she'd ever been with me. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back. I told her I was glad she was doing the self-reflection. I told her I genuinely wanted good things for her. And I told her that what she was feeling now, that hollowness, was not a punishment. It was just information about what actually matters when the noise dies down. I told her I had moved forward, and that I hoped she found what she was looking for. She wrote back 1 line. She said, "I know. I think I waited too long to figure that out. That was the last time we spoke. I think about that dinner table sometimes." The way she swirled her drink and said those words like they cost her nothing. I think about what it cost me to respond the way I did. Not with an argument, not with a list of everything I'd invested, not with begging or ultimatums or a strategic withdrawal designed to manipulate her into changing her mind. Just 2 words and meaning them. All right. Not all right, I forgive you. Not all right, I'll wait. Not all right, I'll become smaller until you're ready. All right, I believe you, and I'm going to live my actual life now. The hardest thing I have ever done in a relationship was stop trying to convince someone to want what I wanted. Not because I gave up on them, but because I finally decided that my life had value too. That my timeline deserved respect too. That wanting permanence and direction, and someone who was actually in it, was not settling, was not boring, was not asking too much. It was, in fact, the minimum, the absolute floor of what a grown adult in a committed relationship has a right to expect. Here is what I want to say to anyone who is sitting where I was sitting, anyone whose partner has told them in whatever words they used that they're not ready, that they want more time, that they still need to figure things out. I want to say this clearly. You are allowed to believe them. You are allowed to act on that belief. You do not have to wait in a room with no closing time. You do not have to make your future smaller to fit inside someone else's maybe. You can say all right, and then you can go build your life. And here's the thing about actually building your life. Not as a threat, not to make a point, not to manipulate someone into coming back, but because you are a real person with one real life who deserves to move forward. Sometimes the person who wasn't ready sees what they were letting go and they make different choices, but sometimes they don't. And it turns out you built something anyway, something steady, something yours. And there is no version of that outcome you will ever regret. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've been the person waiting, or the person who wasn't ready, or somewhere in the complicated middle of both, drop your experience in the comments. You're probably not the only one feeling it. And if this is your first time here, consider subscribing. We don't do manufactured drama on this channel. We tell real human stories about the moments that actually change people. New ones every week. I'll see you in the next one.